Support for WUWM podcasts comes from University School of Milwaukee, fulfilling a values-based mission of developing learners, fostering leaders, and preparing citizens for pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. More information at usm.org/mission.
This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Hi, J.R., how you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Excellent. Okay, so I'd like to start with an important development for ballots down the road this year. Republicans in the legislature approved bills that would bring two constitutional amendments onto the November ballot. A constitutional amendment is a formal change to the state constitution. It has to be passed by simple majorities in two consecutive legislative sessions, and then a majority of voters need to approve it in a statewide election. What can you tell us about these ballot measures?
Well, there are a couple of things going on. One is the message of these bills. Republicans support the measures, and two, the messaging you might see come fall. What I'm getting at is, first, one of the amendments would bar preferential treatment or discrimination on things like race, sex, other factors. The second one would prohibit the closing of a house of worship during an emergency, much like what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, there's a third amendment that is kind of getting close to going to voters that would bar governors from using their partial veto authority to create or increase any tax or fee. Look, Republicans think the public is on their side with these issues, and they've learned lessons from past elections where Democrats, for example, put advisory referendums on marijuana, for example, on the ballot, and they believe it helped drive turnout among non-traditional voters to help Democrats in those elections. Republicans will likely campaign on these issues this fall and hope it helps spark some turnout intensity among their base to help them with the election for governor and to the legislature this fall as well.
So Republicans say that the constitutional amendment about diversity, so that deals with the government being prohibited from, quote, discriminating or giving preferential treatment to groups based on sex, race, ethnicity, things like that. Republicans say that it would, quote, bring merit, fairness, and equity back to the state of Wisconsin. But some advocates point to the fact that the state of Wisconsin and the city of Milwaukee will still see some of the widest racial disparities in home ownership, business ownership, socioeconomic status, and that government-led diversity initiatives are one step to level access. Do Republicans in the legislature contemplate this? Do they have a plan to address this?
They basically want their government to get out of the way and say it's not up to the government to fix these things or try to address them, that it should be about merit and that people should be able to, kind of compete for things on their own. There's, spirited debate on some of those things in the Senate this week. But, for Republicans, they're looking big picture at kind of the push against DEI the last few years, from the backlash we've seen to President Trump running that issue in 2024. And they think the public is generally on their side when it comes to winning those things. And again, that they are looking for things that will help drive their base and get them excited to turn out in 2026.
The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reports that other state legislatures have adopted similar measures as this rolling back of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and that other states have seen reduced enrollment among students of color, a decrease in the number of contracts awarded to minority and women-owned businesses. What do we see as the potential implications or results from a ballot measure like this?
We won't know until if it's implemented and it kind of has its time to work its way through the system. We have seen, for example, efforts to limit DEI at the University of Wisconsin system. That's part of the deal that Robin Vos, Assembly Speaker, struck with leadership a couple of years ago to pave the way for some money to flow to the system. We're seeing legislation flow through both houses right now that would seek to overhaul programs that are geared toward minorities to instead focus on those who are disadvantaged, quote unquote. So we're not sure what the overlap would be or how that would change these programs, but that is one approach that Republicans are taking. So it's hard to predict what's going to happen here in Wisconsin, but this is politically something Republicans think is a winner.
And how realistic is that based on the polling that we see out of Wisconsin? How does this issue play out, like in the Marquette poll or other similar polls?
I don't remember a specific issue that addresses the exact wording of these constitutional amendments, but generally speaking, we've seen that DEI is not that popular with the average voter who's going to turn out in Wisconsin. So the Republicans are making a bet that that's going to continue to hold this fall. Now, the messaging will be interesting. Can Democrats find a message that counters what Republicans are pushing and make the voters think twice about it? I've seen things, for example, that Democrats try to argue that this amendment on, discrimination actually would hurt women, for example, in ways with training standards, stuff like that. I'm not sure how they'd message that, and I'm not sure if that's going to be their focus come fall. Most amendments pass, which put on the ballot. There are only two I can think of that failed in recent years. One was to get rid of the state treasurer's office. There was a concerted effort about that one to push back. And the second one was an amendment that Republicans had pushed to kind of give them say in how federal money is spent. And Democrats effectively messaged that they were going to stand in the way of, getting things done, essentially. And it came back and they beat the amendment. I'm not sure if there's going to be a concerted effort by Democrats to focus on these amendments, to try and message on them with ads, those kinds of things, when their big picture is winning the governor's office, winning the control of the state Senate and the state assembly. That's really their true focus this fall.
This is Capital Notes. I'm Ayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Okay, we'll move on to the fact that it's nice to stumble onto a few extra $1 billion. So estimates from the Nonpartisan Legislative Fiscal Bureau predict that the state will end the 2025-27 budget with a $2.5 billion surplus, about $1.5 billion more than previously expected. What do legislative Republicans want to do with this money? What does Democratic Governor Tony Evers want to do with it? And is there overlap?
Well, for the answer to the last question, not really right now. Governor Evers has been pushing to spend that money on $1.3 billion for property tax relief, to basically do all these things he proposed in the budget last summer that got knocked out by Republicans. Republicans have been kind of downplaying the governor's calls and said, look, if the governor wants to fix what's happened with property taxes, for example, he should join them in reversing his 400-year veto that's going to allow annual increases in the limit how much districts can spend between property taxes and state aid for 400 years. Reverse that, and they can talk about some things. The governor's shown no interest in that. So I don't get the impression there's a giant overlap. Now, if the money sits there, there will be a nice pot of money for the next governor to work with and the new legislature to address his or her priorities. We shall see. We've got about a month left, less than that before the assembly adjourns for the session. People are wondering if there'll be a spending bill to take some of that money and send it back to taxpayers, which lawmakers tend to do in election years when they have money laying around, like give it back to people. We'll see if anything like that materializes, but right now there's not a big effort that I'm seeing publicly between the governor and lawmakers to reach a deal on how to use that money.
And one of the things that's kind of a glaring contrast to this surplus of money is the Medicaid program in the state. That's the joint federal and state program that provides free or low-cost health care coverage to millions of Americans with limited income, including people with disabilities. A recent report from the State Department of Health Services projected a $213 million shortfall in the state's Medicaid budget by the end of 2027. What did they cite as the reasons for this, and what are lawmakers proposing to do about it?
Well, first off, that program is massive, and I don't want to diminish $213 million I certainly don't have in the bank, but it's about 2% of what we're spending in terms of state tax dollars in that program over the 2-year period. That program fluctuates a lot between projected enrollment and those kinds of things. So if we have a bad flu season, for example, I'm not being flippant here, but you have a health scare and utilization could go up, right? If things go well for the year, if the economy picks up, things kind of tamp down. So we've got 18 months at the end of this biennium to know how that fund's going to do. So, but there's greater utilization of programs, higher enrollments, what people were expecting, other things. So that number also isn't factored into that projection of a $2.5 billion surplus because they just don't know what's going to end up in 18 months. There's also a caveat to that surplus that the state of Wisconsin has a thing called a hospital assessment. And basically what you do is you tax hospitals on the revenues, submit it to the Medicaid medical assistance funding formula, and you get more matching dollars from the feds You then turn around and pump back into hospitals to offset what you taxed in the first place and give them more money while, getting a skim, if you want to call it that, for their expenses. There is a question about whether what Wisconsin did is going to be allowed by the Trump administration. If you recall, during the budget process, there was this big kind of final push, get that budget done before the One Big Beautiful Act could be signed into law, because it puts limits on states and how they could use that assessment. If our assessment changes are disallowed, according to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, it could cost us about $800 million over that 2-year period. So, yeah, it's $2.5 billion right now, but you could lose $200 million because of Medicaid costs coming in higher than expected. You could lose $800 million if this assessment is nixed. So now you're talking $1 billion gone, and not projecting that, just saying that that's a possibility. Or as we sit here right now, that you got to watch and kind of like keep some money in reserve just in case things go south.
Gotcha. So there's a question about the upping the amount that hospitals pay to the state to help fund Medicaid payments. Sticking with the topic of funding priorities, there might be some bipartisan consensus on how to keep Wisconsin GOP running. That's the nonpartisan Wisconsin Government Broadcast Network. It live streams most major events at the state capitol. It's sort of the Wisconsin C-SPAN, if you will. WUWM uses it to report on the Capitol, along with so many other individuals and organizations who rely on it. What's been the developments there?
Well, we have a bipartisan bill from assembly leaders that would create a trust fund, that the fund would then generate interest that would be given to Wisconsin GOP annually to help fund operations. It wouldn't cover everything, but it would cover a significant portion of it, and then they have to fundraise for the rest. Now, the state's been trying to figure out a way to help fund Wisconsin GOP for a while. In the 23-25 budget, they put $10 million in matching funds aside. The network never applied for any of it. Then in this current budget, they tweaked that to give Wisconsin GOP $250,000 up front, keep the rest in that fund for matching money. Now they would take that remaining money and put in this trust fund and just have it generate interest. So there's still some details to be worked out. The Senate has been waiting for details. Senator Leader Devin LeMahieu said that he has some questions because he gave Wisconsin GOP, or actually the co-chairs of the Joint Audit Committee sent Wisconsin GOP a letter in December saying, hey, we want all this financial information, give it to us by January 9th. They turned over January 21st, I believe it was. Now the network says that it never got the first letter. When it found out about it, it asked for an extension and turn things over this week. But LeMahieu said he wants to go through those records first to kind of see what's there, because he's skeptical of giving money to a group that's not been, in his mind, very transparent. Obviously, Wisconsin GOP disputes that, says it's been doing, and he's been asked of it when he gets a request. But there's still some little hang up there on that front. Governor Evers has said he's not in favor of just giving them money. He wants some skin in the game. So will this arrangement, this proposal work with the governor? We'll see. His office told me he wasn't involved in the discussions about this legislation. So there's still some ways to go, but it seems like there's at least some interest in keeping access to watching the state capitol operate for the public. The question, what's it look like, and how's it be funded? For sure, there's still a little ways to go on that.
Does the leadership of Wisconsin GOP seem to be on board?
Seems to be. They're saying positive things, but again, we're still in the negotiation stage. We're still trying to get final details wrapped up so they know what's going on and can really dig into it.
And is this the first time that we've seen such a bipartisan push for a while? And if so, why did this issue bring Republican Assembly Speaker Robin Vos and Democratic Assembly Minority Leader Greta Neubauer together?
Put it this way, there's often availabilities with reporters before session days. I can't remember the last time that there was a joint one between the Democratic and Republican leader of the Assembly, so that tells you how rare it is. Good question about why this issue, but both sides want access and transparency. What's been interesting is, I talk to people in the Capitol about this, lawmakers, they don't get a lot of feedback from like average constituents who are really like missing Wisconsin GOP. They get feedback, now not to say there aren't people who watch it, but they get feedback from lobbyists and from their staff, because people who are involved in politics use it the most. It's a great tool for those of us who are junkies to watch what's going on, but I don't know how widespread it's used. among the 5 million people we have in Wisconsin, right? So it's just not a burning issue for constituents. And if constituents aren't lighting up the phones, lawmakers sometimes aren't in a big hurry to work something out.
Wow, interesting. I guess, people have to understand how clear of a tool this is for, getting reporting to them or, having access. I talked to Bill Leaders of the Freedom of Information Council, and he said that he hates the phrase, you don't know how the sausage is being made or sausage or laws are being made, because he thinks that it's really important for people to be able to see those things. And Wisconsin I is one of those tools. Like, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Well, just think about it. I mean, most of us have a job and we go to work during the day. And when they're on the floor at 2:00 in the afternoon, a lot of people are at work. So yeah, you can go back and watch later on, but it's not really something that is easily accessible because of the other priorities we have as citizens in the state. It's a great tool to see. Again, great resource, but I'm just talking about like how many people are tuning in for a 10:00 hearing on a Tuesday morning, right? Because they've got other stuff to do. They rely on us in the media to kind of be their eyes and ears in the Capitol often.
Right, definitely. But inherently, Wisconsin I is one of those tools. Yeah. Well, thanks for the insights, JR. And as always, thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
That was J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on Lake Effect, and check out the Capitol Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.